Welcome to my YouTube channel at Sci-Fi Tales Pules. Please subscribe, like, and share to support my channel. The sky was gray and heavy with falling snow. Vola lay silent under the deep winter. The land was cold and lifeless. The trees stood bare and still. The wind moved through the empty streets of the capital. The tall palace of the queen stood in the heart of the city. Its high walls were covered in frost. The gates were shut tight. Soldiers stood guard with swords in hand. The kingdom was at war. Inside the palace, the queen sat upon her throne. Her name was Alara. She wore a gown of black and silver. Her crown shone faintly in the pale light. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried the weight of the kingdom. She knew the enemy was close. Scouts had told her that the southern army was moving fast. They had crossed the frozen river and broken through the first line of defense. Far from the palace, a young warrior named Cole stood on the wall of the last stronghold. His armor was dented from past battles. His sword was in his hand. His breath rose in white clouds. Round him, other soldiers waited. They knew that the next attack would be the hardest. Cole's heart was steady. He'd fought in many battles before, but this one was different. This was for the queen. The sound of horns broke the silence. Dark shapes moved in the snow. The enemy came with shields raised and blades ready. The clash was sudden and fierce. Cole moved through the fight with skill. His sword cut through the enemy line. The snow turned red under the weight of the battle. Still they came. The stronghold began to shake as the gates fell. Cole called for the men to fall back to the palace. They moved through the narrow streets, fighting step by step. By the time they reached the palace, the gates were closing. Cole was the last to step inside. The enemy beat upon the doors with heavy blows. The sound rang through the halls. The queen stood at the far end, watching as her guards formed a wall around her. Cole took his place at the front. His eyes met hers for a moment. There was no fear in them, only resolve. The first doors broke. The enemy poured into the palace halls. Steel rang against steel. The walls shook with the force of the fight. Cole fought without pause. He blocked and struck. He moved to protect the queen with each step he took. The enemy pressed hard, but Cole did not yield. A blade cut across his side. The pain was sharp, but he stayed on his feet. His breath grew heavy. His armor felt heavier with each movement. The enemy came closer to the throne. Cole pushed forward again. His sword flashed in the dim light. He fought until his arms ached. The queen stood still upon the throne. She would not run. Cole knew he had to hold the line. He stepped forward once more. The snow outside kept falling. The battle inside the palace burned hotter. Cole's blood marked the stone floor, yet he kept his grip on the sword. For the queen, for the kingdom, for Avalora, he would fight until his last breath. The sound of swords striking filled the air. The great hall of the palace had turned into a place of fire and steel. Cole stood at the front with his sword raised. The queen watched from the throne. Her eyes followed his every move. The enemy came in waves. Each step they took was met with the swing of Cole's blade. The light from the tall windows fell upon the silver in his armor. His boots scraped across the cold floor as he pushed forward. Ow! The guards around Cole fought with all their strength. Some fell, but more stepped in to take their place. The enemy did not stop. They were driven by hunger for power, their eyes fixed on the throne. Cole could feel the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. His breath came heavy, and his arms began to feel the strain. Still, he did not give ground. A sharp strike came from the side. Cole turned and blocked it. The sword rang as it met the enemy blade. Pain shot through his side where the wound from before had begun to bleed again. He did not let it slow him. The queen's safety was worth more than his life. He pressed forward and pushed the enemy back a few steps. His boots slid in the mix of snow and blood that had found its way onto the stone. The noise of the battle echoed up to the high ceiling. It felt as if the whole palace shook with each clash. The queen rose from her seat and stepped down from the throne. Her gown moved like dark water as she came forward. The guards tried to keep her back, but she would not stand still. She looked at Cole, and there was a fire in her gaze. The enemy leader shouted from the far side of the hall. More men pushed into the room. Cole gripped his sword tighter. The guards around him closed ranks. The hall was now packed with fighters. The sound of metal and the shouts of men filled every corner. Cole's wound burned with each movement. His vision blurred for a moment. but he shook it away. He had no time for weakness. The fight moved toward the grand stairs that led to the inner halls of the palace. Cole knew if the enemy reached those halls, the queen would have no escape. Planted his feet at the base of the stairs. The guards formed a wall around him. The enemy crashed against them like a wave against rock. Cole swung again and again. His arms felt heavy as stone, but he kept striking. Blood ran down his side and across the plates of his armor. His breath was short. The queen stood behind him now. She placed a hand on his shoulder for just a moment. That touch filled him with new strength. He stepped forward into the fray once more. His sword flashed in the dim light. He moved with the last of his strength, cutting down those who came near the queen. The floor was slick and the air thick with the smell of battle. Cole felt the world grow small around him. The sound of steel faded for a moment as his focus narrowed to the queen and the enemy before him. Every strike was for her. Every block was to keep her safe. The hall began to clear as the enemy fell back for a breath. Cole stood tall, though his body screamed with pain. The guards held their line. The queen looked at him and saw the cost he was paying. She wanted to tell him to stop, but she knew he would not. His duty was clear. The enemy would return, and the fight was far from over. Cole tightened his grip on the sword once more. The next wave was coming, and he was ready to face it, even if it meant he would not see another sunrise. The sound of boots on stone grew louder as the next wave of enemies rushed into the hall. Cole felt his heart pound in his chest. His breath came in deep, heavy pulls. The queen stood behind him, her eyes fixed on the fight. The guards braced themselves and raised their swords. Cole stepped forward to meet the charge. The clash was sudden and fierce. Blades struck against shields and the air filled with the cries of battle. Cole's wound burned like fire. Each movement sent sharp pain through his side. Still, he fought with all the strength he had left. His sword moved with purpose. Cut down one enemy, then turned to block another. The hall shook with the force of the fight. The queen called to her guards to hold the line. Her voice was strong and clear. It carried over the chaos and gave the men strength. The enemy leader pushed his way through the fight. He was taller than the rest, and his armor was dark and worn from many battles. His eyes locked on the queen. Cole saw him moving closer and knew what he meant to do. With a surge of strength, Cole broke through the line of fighters and stepped into the path of the enemy leader. Their swords met with a crash that echoed through the hall. They fought in the center of the room. Each strike sent sparks into the air. The enemy leader was strong and his blows were heavy. Cole's arms ached from the force of each block. Blood from his wound stained his armor and dripped onto the floor. His vision blurred again, but he held his ground. The queen watched as the two men fought with every ounce of their strength. At last Cole saw an opening, swung his sword in a wide arc, and struck the enemy leader across the side. The man staggered, but did not fall. With a roar, he raised his weapon for a final strike. Cole stepped in close and drove his blade forward. The enemy leader dropped his sword and fell to the floor. The fight around them slowed as the soldiers saw their leader fall, but the victory came at a cost. Cole felt his knees grow weak. His strength was nearly gone. The pain in his side had grown worse, and his breaths were shallow. The queen rushed to his side and caught him before he could fall. Her hands gripped his shoulders and she looked into his eyes. There was both pride and sorrow in her face. The enemy began to retreat. Without their leader, they had lost their will to fight. The guards of the queen pushed them back through the gates and out into the snow. The sound of battle faded until there was only the soft crackle of torches in the hall. Cole still stood, but only by the will of his spirit. The queen would not let him fall. She called for her healers, and they came at once. They tried to move Cole to a safer place, but he refused to leave the hall until he was certain the enemy was gone. His voice was low, but firm. He would not rest until the queen was safe. The guards assured him the gates were secure. At last, he allowed them to guide him toward the inner chambers. His steps were slow and heavy. Each one felt like it might be his last. The queen walked beside him. She did not speak. She only stayed close as they moved through the long corridors of the palace. The light from the windows fell on his pale face. The blood from his wound had soaked through his armor. The healers worked quickly as they reached the inner room. They removed his armor and began to clean the wound. Cole's eyes closed for a moment. But he opened them again when he felt the queen's hand on his arm. He knew the fight was not over. The enemy might return, and he might not be ready to face them again. But in that moment, he had done what he had sworn to do. He had kept the queen safe. That thought gave him peace, even as the pain grew stronger. The healers worked through the night. Cole lay on a long wooden table in the inner chamber. The queen sat nearby. She did not leave his side. The sound of the wind outside was broken by the distant calls of guards upon the walls. The palace was safe for the moment. The battle had left the air heavy with the scent of smoke and steel. Cole's breathing was slow and heavy. His skin was pale. His armor lay on the floor beside him, dark with blood. The queen watched as the healers cleaned and bound his wound. They used every skill they knew to keep his life from slipping away. Cole's eyes opened now and then. Each time he saw the queen, and each time he tried to speak, but she told him to rest. Her voice was steady, though her heart felt the weight of what had happened. News of the battle spread through Avalora. Word of the warrior who had stood before the queen and held back the enemy reached every street and home. Farmers in the outer villages spoke his name with pride. Traders in the markets told the tale to travelers. Teldrin acted out the fight in the snow using sticks as swords. Cole's blood had been spilled to protect the crown, and that sacrifice stirred the hearts of the people. In the days that followed, the people began to gather in the capital. Men who had never lifted a sword came to train with the guards. Women joined in to carry supplies and care for the wounded. The blacksmiths worked day and night to make more weapons and armor. Hunters from the hills brought fresh meat for the soldiers. The spirit of Avalora was rising again. Cole remained in the inner chamber. The healers kept him there to recover. His body was weak, but his mind was sharp. The queen came to him often to speak of the state of the kingdom. She told him how the people were answering the call to defend their land. Each word filled him with pride. He longed to return to the fight, but the healers warned that his wound was still deep. One morning, as the sun broke through the clouds, the queen entered the chamber with a group of her captains. They stood before Cole and spoke of a plan to drive the enemy from the borders. The queen said the people were ready, and the army was strong again. She asked Cole to guide them, though he could not yet fight. Cole agreed without pause. From his bed, he gave orders and set strategies. He told the captains where the enemy might be weak. He spoke of the ground and the passes through the hills that could be used to their advantage. The captains listened to every word. The queen stood beside him, and her presence filled the room with a quiet strength. When the army left the city, Cole remained behind, but his spirit went with them. People marched under the banner of Avalora and the memory of the warrior, who had stood in the hall of the palace. They moved through snow and wind with their heads high. The queen rode at the front, leading them toward the southern border. The first clash came at the old stone bridge over the frozen river. The enemy had taken the far side and thought they could hold it. But the spirit of Avalora burned bright in the hearts of the queen's army. They fought with the will of those who knew their home and their loved ones were behind them. The enemy was driven back step by step until the bridge was clear. Word of the victory reached the capital before nightfall. Cole heard it from the lips of a young soldier who had ridden hard to bring the news. The warrior closed his eyes and felt the weight of the moment. His blood had been spilled, yet it had given life to the will of the people. Avalora was no longer standing on the edge of defeat. It was rising. And he knew the fight for freedom was not yet over. The sun rose over Avalora, casting a warm light across the white fields. The air was still and clear. The sound of marching feet came from the south as the army returned. They had fought many battles in the last weeks, and each one had brought them closer to freedom. The enemy had been driven beyond the borders. Villages that had been under threat were safe again. The people lined the roads to greet their soldiers. They held banners and called out with joy. Cole watched from the palace steps. His side still ached, but he stood tall. The queen rode at the front of the army. Her armor was marked from battle, but her face was bright with victory. She stopped before the steps and dismounted. The two of them stood before each other, and for a moment no words were spoken. The people behind them cheered, and the sound filled the air. The queen stepped closer and placed her hand on Cole's shoulder. She told him that his courage had saved the kingdom. Without his stand in the great hall, Avalora might have fallen. Cole bowed his head and said he had only done what was needed. The queen shook her head and said his name would be remembered for as long as Avalora stood. In the days that followed, the city began to rebuild. The broken gates of the palace were repaired. The walls were cleaned of the marks of battle. Streets that had been silent were filled with the sound of life again. Markets opened and children played in the snow. The people carried with them a pride they had not felt in many years. The queen called for a gathering in the great square. Every street leading to the square was filled with people. Cole stood beside her on the high platform. She spoke to the crowd and told them of the battles they had faced. She spoke of the men and women who had given their lives. Then she told the story of the warrior who had stood before her throne when the enemy came. She told of the blood he had spilled and how that blood had become the fire that burned in every heart. The people raised their voices and called Cole's name. The sound rolled through the city like thunder. Cole felt the weight of their praise, but he also felt the memory of those who had not returned. He knew the victory belonged to them all. The queen turned and placed a silver chain around his neck. It held a medallion marked with the crest of Avalora. She told him it was a symbol of the bond between him and the crown. That night, the city was filled with light. Fires burned in the squares and music played in the streets. The people danced and sang. Cole walked among them. Children ran to him and asked to hear the story again. Told them not of his own deeds, but of the bravery of all who had stood that day. Told them that courage was not in strength alone, but in the will to protect what was right. In the quiet hours before dawn, Cole stood upon the balcony of the palace. The queen joined him. Together they looked out over the sleeping city. The snow reflected the first light of morning. The queen said the kingdom would remember the cost of its freedom. She said the people would always know that their safety had been bought by the blood of those who fought for them. Cole looked at her and said he would stand again if the day ever came. She told him she knew he would, and that was why Avalora would always endure. They stood in silence for a time, watching the sky grow bright. The sound of the city beginning to wake rose up to them. Cole felt the weight of the past weeks, but he also felt the hope of what lay ahead. And so the kingdom of Avalora entered a new chapter. The queen ruled with strength and wisdom. The people stood united. And in the heart of their story, there would always be the memory of the day a warrior's blood saved their crown. Thank you for watching and being part of our community.